A Luna who cannot give the kingdom an heir is no Luna at all. The words echoed through the moon hall with a silence far colder than a scream, and every noble in attendance lowered their eyes just long enough to hide their satisfaction before looking back to witness the humiliation they had been waiting for. Evelyn Carter stood beneath the silver light pouring through the cathedral windows, her hands folded before her, refusing to let them see how violently they trembled. For 3 years she had carried the weight of a crown that never truly belonged to her, smiling through whispered rumors, enduring endless remedies from royal healers, and praying every full moon that destiny would answer with the child everyone demanded. Instead, destiny had answered with silence. Across the polished marble floor, Alpha King Damian Blackwood rose from his throne, every movement calm, measured, and impossibly distant. The powerful Alpha who had once promised to stand beside her now looked at her, as though she were another failed treaty waiting to be discarded. His silver eyes held no warmth as he stepped forward and unclasped the moon ring from her trembling finger. The tiny sound of metal leaving skin felt louder than the thunder gathering outside the palace. "The moon goddess has made her judgment," Damian declared, his voice carrying effortlessly through the grand hall. "I will not allow the future of Blackwood to end because of one barren mate." A ripple of whispers swept across the nobles like wine through dead leaves. Some pitied her. Most did not. Evelyn searched his face for the man who had once laughed beside a quiet lake, who had promised her she would never face the world alone. She found only a king. She bowed her head with what little dignity remained, refusing to plead, refusing to argue, refusing to become another spectacle for those already celebrating her downfall. As she turned toward the towering palace doors, no one stepped aside to comfort her. No one called her name. Outside, cold rain washed over the stone courtyard, soaking her simple traveling cloak within seconds. Each step away from the palace felt lighter than the one before, as though every cruel expectation had finally slipped from her shoulders. Hidden beneath the ache in her heart, however, another sensation quietly stirred. A faint flutter, so gentle she almost mistook it for grief. Evelyn paused, pressing a hand against her abdomen as warmth spread beneath her palm despite the freezing rain. Confused, exhausted, and believing it to be nothing more than the cruel trick of a broken heart, she continued walking into the storm, never realizing that the greatest mistake the Alpha King would ever make had already begun to grow beneath her heartbeat. The rain followed Evelyn Carter for nearly 50 miles before the mountains finally swallowed the last glimpse of Blackwood Kingdom behind layers of mist. She had stopped counting the hours because every mile placed another piece of her former life farther beyond reach. The expensive gowns, the royal chambers, the endless ceremonies, even the title of Luna no longer belonged to her. All she carried was a weathered leather satchel, a wool cloak that offered little protection against the autumn wind, and a heart that refused to understand how love could disappear so completely. By the third morning her strength began to fade. She found shelter inside a small abandoned chapel resting between towering pine trees where faded carvings of the moon goddess still covered the ancient stone walls. The quiet there felt different from the silence of the palace. It did not judge her. It simply waited. As Evelyn knelt to whisper a prayer she had spoken countless times before, a sudden wave of dizziness forced her to grip the edge of a wooden bench. Warmth spread through her body again, stronger than before, followed by an unmistakable flutter beneath her hand. Fear mixed with hope as tears filled her eyes. She had been told again and again that she would never carry a child. Every healer in the kingdom had repeated the same cruel conclusion until even she believed it. Yet something inside her whispered that they had all been wrong. Before doubt could return, the chapel door slowly opened. An elderly woman stepped inside carrying a basket of herbs, her silver hair braided beneath a dark green hood. Her bright blue eyes rested on Evelyn for only a moment before a gentle smile softened her weathered face. "You have traveled too far while carrying far more than you realize," the woman said quietly. Evelyn stared in confusion. She had not spoken a single word. The old healer introduced herself as Margaret Holloway, a woman known throughout the northern villages for helping travelers and abandoned families. She invited Evelyn to her nearby cottage, where the scent of fresh bread and burning cedar filled the warm rooms. After preparing tea made from mountain herbs, Margaret carefully examined Evelyn with experienced hands and patient silence. Minutes passed before she finally looked up, and the expression in her eyes held both wonder and disbelief. "Child," she whispered, You were never barren. Evelyn could only stare back as the words echoed through every broken corner of her heart. Margaret placed a reassuring hand over Evelyn's trembling fingers before continuing. Not only has new life begun, but I hear 4 tiny heartbeats. For children. For boys, if the old gifts still speak true. The room became impossibly still. Evelyn pressed both hands against her abdomen, unable to breathe as joy crashed against years of grief and humiliation. For children. For impossible miracles growing where everyone had insisted there could only be emptiness. Outside, sunlight finally pierced the storm clouds, bathing the little cottage in silver light. Far away, Damien Blackwood continued ruling a kingdom convinced he had cast aside a barren mate, never imagining that destiny had quietly entrusted her with the future of his entire bloodline. 6 years passed like quiet seasons carried by the mountain winds, and the little cottage hidden among the towering pines slowly became a home filled with laughter instead of sorrow. Evelyn Carter no longer measured time by painful memories. She measured it by the growing footsteps that echoed across the wooden floors each morning. Ethan was thoughtful beyond his years, always noticing when someone needed help before they asked. Liam possessed fearless determination, forever climbing the tallest rocks and insisting every challenge could be conquered with enough patience. Noah carried a calm wisdom that often surprised even Margaret Holloway, asking questions that sounded far older than a child should ever speak. Lucas, the youngest by only minutes, had a smile bright enough to soften even the hardest day, and every injured bird or frightened animal somehow found its way into his gentle hands. Together they filled the valley with a warmth Evelyn once believed she would never know again. The 4 boys knew nothing about crowns or palaces. Their days were spent gathering firewood, tending the garden, studying old books, and learning that true strength was measured by kindness instead of power. Margaret often reminded them that the greatest alpha was never the loudest voice in the room, but the one who made everyone else feel safe. The boys listened carefully, never realizing how deeply those words would shape their futures. Yet there were moments that no lesson could explain. During one winter afternoon, Ethan lifted a fallen tree branch that should have required 3 grown men to move. Liam outran a mountain deer for nearly half a mile without showing the slightest sign of exhaustion. Noah could calm frightened wolves simply by standing nearby, while Lucas seemed able to soothe pain with nothing more than a gentle touch and quiet reassurance. Whenever these unusual gifts appeared, Margaret exchanged silent glances with Evelyn. The old healer recognized the unmistakable signs of royal alpha blood, awakening exactly as the ancient legends had promised. Evelyn never allowed pride to replace humility. Every evening she gathered her sons around the fireplace and told them that people should never be judged by wealth, titles, or mistakes. She never spoke Damien Blackwood's name with hatred. When the boys occasionally asked about their father, she simply smiled with quiet sadness and answered that every person carried both light and shadow inside their heart, and one day they would understand why forgiveness demanded greater courage than anger. Far beyond the peaceful valley, however, the kingdom they had left behind no longer resembled the prosperous land Evelyn remembered. Harvests failed across several territories after years of relentless storms. Rival alpha houses questioned the future of the royal bloodline, whispering that a kingdom without heirs stood on fragile ground. Advisors urged King Damien to choose another Luna, yet every formal introduction ended the same way. He dismissed them all without explanation. The palace remained magnificent, but its halls had grown strangely empty, as though the laughter that once belonged there had vanished forever. On the morning of the boy's 6th birthday, Margaret stood quietly outside the cottage watching 4 silver hawks circle high above the valley before disappearing toward the distant kingdom. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, almost as though speaking to destiny itself. The time of hiding is ending. The moon has begun calling its heirs home. The first snow of winter settled across Blackwood Kingdom, covering rooftops and castle walls in a peaceful blanket of white, yet no season could hide the growing unease spreading through the realm. Merchants spoke in hushed voices about uncertain roads. Village elders wondered who would inherit the throne when the time finally came. Noble families arrived at the royal court one after another, each eager to present a daughter worthy of becoming the next Luna, believing the future of the kingdom depended upon a new royal union. Every proposal reached the same destination. King Damien Blackwood listened with perfect courtesy before declining each offer without explanation. At first the council believed he simply needed more time. Then months became years. Eventually even the most loyal advisors began questioning whether the kingdom itself had become trapped by a decision no one dared mention aloud. Damien spent longer hours inside the Hall of Kings than anyone realized. When the court finally emptied each evening, he often remained standing before the enormous stained glass window that overlooked the valley beyond the capital. The view had not changed since the day Evelyn walked away beneath the cold rain. Yet something about it always stirred an uneasy feeling he could never silence. He told himself he had acted for the good of the kingdom. A king needed heirs. A kingdom required certainty. Those were the truths every ruler accepted. Yet whenever he repeated those words in his mind, another memory quietly answered them. Evelyn smiling while placing fresh flowers beside the palace windows. Evelyn comforting frightened servants after difficult days. Evelyn believing in him long before the crown rested upon his head. Those memories refused to disappear no matter how deeply he buried them beneath duty. One afternoon the oldest royal historian entered the throne room carrying a weathered scroll discovered beneath the castle library. The parchment described an ancient prophecy almost forgotten by time. It spoke of 4 alpha heirs born beneath the blessing of the moon, children whose united spirits would preserve the kingdom through its darkest generation. Damien listened politely before dismissing the story as little more than folklore. Yet after the historian departed, he found himself reading the fragile pages alone long after sunset. For heirs. The number lingered in his thoughts for reasons he could not explain. Meanwhile, far beyond the capital, Evelyn watched her sons race through snow-covered meadows with joyful laughter echoing between the mountains. Ethan patiently helped Lucas build shelters for wandering animals before the coming storm. Liam challenged Noah to friendly races across frozen streams, celebrating every victory and every defeat with the same cheerful grin. Margaret stood beside Evelyn outside the cottage, her eyes following the boys with quiet admiration. "They are becoming exactly who the moon intended," she whispered. Evelyn smiled, although concern briefly crossed her face. "I only pray they never have to carry the burdens that came before them." Margaret looked toward the distant horizon where the peaks slowly disappeared beneath gathering clouds. "Sometimes destiny does not ask whether we are ready," she answered softly. "Sometimes it simply opens the road beneath our feet." At that very moment, a royal messenger wearing the crest of Blackwood Kingdom rode into the nearest mountain village carrying sealed invitations to every settlement. The kingdom would soon host the Great Moon Festival, inviting every family from every territory to celebrate unity after years of hardship. As the announcement spread from village to village, none of them realized that one invitation would quietly guide a forgotten Luna, and 4 extraordinary boys back toward the kingdom that had once believed they did not exist. The journey back to Blackwood Kingdom took 5 days, winding through forests painted with the golden colors of late autumn, before opening onto wide valleys where thousands of travelers gathered for the Great Moon Festival. Colorful banners fluttered above crowded streets, musicians filled the crisp air with cheerful melodies, and merchants welcomed visitors from every corner of the Northern Territories. For Ethan, Liam, Noah, and Lucas it was the largest gathering they had ever seen. Their eyes sparkled with excitement as they admired handmade wooden toys, fragrant bakeries, and skilled craftsmen shaping silver beneath open tents. Evelyn watched her sons with a peaceful smile, grateful that they could experience wonder without knowing the painful memories hidden beneath the city's towering walls. She had almost forgotten how beautiful the capital appeared beneath the afternoon sun. Time had softened the sharp edges of her past, but every familiar street awakened echoes she thought had disappeared forever. Margaret walked beside her, steady and calm as always. "Remember why we came," the elderly healer said gently. "Not to reopen old wounds, but to let the boys see the world beyond the mountains." Evelyn nodded, silently repeating those words to herself. She believed she could remain unnoticed among thousands of visitors. Destiny, however, had already chosen another path. Near the center of the festival square, frightened voices suddenly rose above the music as a beautifully decorated carriage rolled downhill after its horses became startled by the noise of the crowd. People stepped aside in panic, uncertain how to stop the heavy carriage without risking injury. Before Evelyn could react, Ethan sprinted forward with remarkable confidence, calling for everyone to move aside. Liam reached the horses first, speaking calmly until their frightened breathing slowed. Noah guided several younger children safely away from the road, while Lucas helped an elderly man regain his balance after nearly falling. Within moments the danger had passed, leaving the gathered crowd staring in astonishment at four boys who had acted with unusual courage and perfect teamwork. Applause spread across the square as grateful families thanked them one after another. Standing on the balcony overlooking the festival, Damian Blackwood had witnessed the entire scene. His attention had first been drawn to the boys because of their composure, but as they stepped into the sunlight, something far more unsettling caught his eye. Their silver-gray eyes reflected the afternoon light exactly as his own did. Ethan carried himself with quiet confidence that reminded Damian of his younger self before the crown. Liam's determined expression felt strangely familiar. Noah's calm gaze seemed older than his years, while Lucas smiled with the same warmth Damian remembered seeing long ago in someone he had tried desperately to forget. The Alpha King found himself unable to look away. "Who are those children?" he asked quietly. None of his advisors recognized them. Down below, one of the boys glanced toward the palace balcony for only a brief second. Damian felt an unfamiliar pull deep within his instincts, powerful enough to make the world around him fade into silence. For reasons he could neither explain nor ignore, meeting those four remarkable boys suddenly felt more important than any celebration the festival had been meant to honor. The excitement of the festival lingered long after the crowd had dispersed, but Damian Blackwood found no peace within the towering walls of his palace. The image of the four remarkable boys refused to leave his thoughts. Their faces, their voices, even the way they instinctively protected complete strangers stirred memories he had buried beneath years of duty. Early the next morning, he ordered a private gathering in the royal hall to honor the young visitors whose courage had prevented tragedy during the celebration. Representatives from every village arrived, bringing their families dressed in their finest clothes. Evelyn hesitated when the invitation reached her hands. Every instinct urged her to leave the kingdom before sunrise, yet Margaret gently placed a reassuring hand upon her shoulder. "Running from yesterday will never change tomorrow," the old healer said softly. "Trust the path that has brought you here." With quiet determination, Evelyn led Ethan, Liam, Noah, and Lucas through the enormous palace doors she had once called home. The familiar marble floors awakened painful memories, but her sons walked beside her with innocent curiosity, unaware that their mother had once crossed those same halls wearing the moon ring of a queen. As the ceremony began, Damian addressed the gathered families with calm gratitude before stepping down from the throne to personally greet each child. When he finally stood before the four brothers, an unusual silence settled across the hall. Ethan met the king's eyes without fear yet with complete respect. Liam smiled confidently. Noah offered a polite bow beyond his years, while Lucas greeted him with the same warm kindness he showed everyone he met. Damian felt the strange pull return, stronger than before. It was not recognition born from memory. It was something deeper, older, woven into instinct itself. Before he could understand the feeling, the kingdom's oldest spiritual elder slowly rose from his seat. Elder Samuel had served 3 generations of Alpha rulers, and few questioned his wisdom. His silver staff gently touched the polished floor as he approached the boys one by one. His weathered eyes widened with every passing heartbeat. Finally he lifted a trembling hand toward Ethan, where a faint silver glow briefly shimmered across the child's wrist before fading like moonlight on water. A quiet gasp spread through the room. Elder Samuel closed his eyes, whispering an ancient blessing known only to the royal bloodline. As his final words faded into silence, delicate silver markings appeared for a brief moment on all 4 boys, identical to the sacred crest carried by every true heir of House Blackwood since the kingdom's founding. No magic had been summoned. No ritual had been performed. The ancient mark had awakened entirely on its own. The elder slowly turned toward Damian, tears filling his aged eyes. "Your Majesty," he whispered with reverent certainty, "the royal blood recognizes its own. These children carry the blessing of the Alpha Kings." The hall fell completely silent. Noble families stared in disbelief while advisors exchanged stunned glances. Damian could barely breathe as his gaze shifted from the glowing marks to Evelyn standing only a few feet away. For the first time in 6 long years, their eyes met again, and in that single heartbreaking moment, the impossible truth began fitting together with devastating clarity. Evelyn could not remember whether her heart stopped first or whether time itself simply refused to move. Every face inside the royal hall had turned toward her, but she kept her eyes on her sons. Ethan instinctively stepped half a pace closer to his brothers. Liam reached for Lucas's hand without a word. Noah quietly observed the room with surprising calm, sensing the tension even if he did not fully understand it. Margaret Holloway stood beside them, her expression peaceful, as though she had expected this moment since the day she first heard 4 tiny heartbeats within Evelyn's womb. Damien Blackwood slowly approached, not as the commanding ruler who had addressed the court only moments earlier, but as a man struggling beneath the crushing weight of a truth he had never imagined. His voice, once unwavering in every royal decree, carried an unfamiliar hesitation. Evelyn. It was the first time he had spoken her name in 6 years. She met his gaze with quiet composure. The pain that had once lived in her eyes had been replaced by something far stronger. Peace. Are they? Damien began, but the words refused to leave his lips. He already knew the answer. Elder Samuel lowered his head respectfully. The moon does not place the royal mark upon strangers, Your Majesty. Blood remembers what pride forgets. A heavy silence settled across the chamber. Damien looked from one child to the next, noticing details that suddenly seemed impossible to ignore. Ethan's thoughtful expression mirrored his own father during younger days. Liam carried the fearless determination of generations of Blackwood leaders. Noah possessed the calm judgment every great ruler required, while Lucas smiled with the warmth that had once made Evelyn's presence feel like home within the palace walls. 6 birthdays. 6 winters. 6 years of stories, laughter, first words, first steps, and family memories had unfolded without him. No battle he had ever fought compared to the regret now filling his heart. Why did you never tell me? He asked quietly, though even as the question escaped him, he recognized its unfairness. Evelyn answered with remarkable gentleness. The day I left this palace, you had already decided who I was. You believed I could never give you a future. I did not leave because I carried no hope. I left because there was no place here for the truth. Damien lowered his eyes. Memories returned with painful clarity. The moon ring slipping from her finger. The whispers inside the hall. The rain beyond the palace gates. He had believed he was protecting his kingdom. Instead, he had abandoned the very family the kingdom had longed for. Slowly, before nobles, advisors, elders, and every gathered witness, the Alpha King bowed his head to the woman he had once cast aside. No royal command forced the gesture. No ceremony required it. It came only from genuine remorse. I cannot change what I did, he said softly. But if there is any path left for forgiveness, I will spend the rest of my life walking it. Evelyn remained silent for several heartbeats before answering with steady honesty. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, Damien. My children deserve truth. They deserve kindness. They deserve a father worthy of the love they have always been ready to give. Whether that man still exists is not for me to decide. It is for you to become. Around them, the royal hall remained perfectly still, because everyone understood they had just witnessed something far greater than the revelation of 4 royal heirs. They had witnessed the first fragile step in the redemption of a king. The revelation inside the royal hall spread across Blackwood Kingdom before sunset, and with it came both celebration and uncertainty. Families filled the streets with hopeful conversations about the return of the royal bloodline, yet not every heart welcomed the news. Among the noble houses, those who had quietly built their ambitions around a kingdom without heirs suddenly realized that 4 young princes had changed the future in a single afternoon. While the palace prepared rooms for Evelyn and the boys as honored guests, Damien ordered the highest level of protection around them, refusing to leave anything to chance. He no longer saw the children as symbols of the throne. He saw for precious years he could never reclaim. Ethan noticed the increased guards first and quietly asked his mother whether they had done something wrong. Evelyn knelt beside him and gently brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. No, she answered with a warm smile. Sometimes when people discover something valuable, others become afraid of losing what they wanted for themselves. The boys accepted her explanation with the trust only children could give, but Damien heard every word from the nearby corridor, and guilt settled even deeper within his heart. That evening, the palace gardens glowed beneath hundreds of silver lanterns, As guests gathered for the final ceremony of the festival, music drifted through the cool air while children laughed beneath the ancient oak trees. Ethan, Liam, Noah and Lucas wandered only a short distance from Evelyn, fascinated by the fountains and carved stone wolves that decorated the royal grounds. Suddenly, Lucas stopped beside a frightened little girl who had become separated from her parents in the crowd. Without hesitation, the four brothers worked together exactly as they always had. Ethan comforted the child. Noah calmly asked nearby guests whether anyone recognized her family. Liam searched the surrounding paths, and Lucas stayed beside the girl until her worried parents arrived moments later. The grateful family embraced their daughter with tears of relief, and many guests quietly smiled at the kindness displayed by the young princes. Damien watched from a distance, realizing that the greatest inheritance he had missed was not their royal blood, but the character Evelyn had patiently built within them. Later that night, Elder Samuel requested a private audience with the king. The old man placed the ancient prophecy upon Damien's desk once more and spoke with unusual seriousness. "The greatest danger to these boys will never come from the forest or the mountains," he said. "It will come from hearts consumed by pride and fear. Protect them first as children, only afterward as heirs." Damien nodded without hesitation. "I failed them once before I even knew they existed. I will not fail them again." As moonlight poured across the palace balcony, he looked toward the guest wing where Evelyn was reading bedtime stories to the four boys. Their laughter drifted softly through the open windows, gentle enough to quiet even the restless night. For the first time in many years, Blackwood Palace no longer felt like a fortress built from stone. It felt like a home waiting to be rebuilt, one act of kindness at a time, even as unseen eyes beyond the palace walls quietly began watching the royal family with growing interest. Morning sunlight poured across the palace gardens as though the kingdom itself had awakened after a long winter. Ethan, Liam, Noah and Lucas chased one another across the dew-covered grass while their laughter echoed against the ancient stone walls. Servants who had once walked the halls in fearful silence now smiled as the boys greeted each person by name, offering cheerful waves and sincere thanks for the smallest acts of kindness. Evelyn watched from beneath the shade of an old oak tree, realizing that the palace no longer reminded her of the place where she had lost everything. It had become the place where her sons were quietly teaching everyone what true leadership looked like. Damien approached slowly, carrying a small velvet box that had remained untouched inside the royal treasury for 6 years. He stopped several feet away, leaving the choice entirely in Evelyn's hands. Without speaking, he opened the box. Resting inside was the moon ring he had once removed with cold certainty. Its silver surface reflected the morning light, but this time there was no royal ceremony, no council watching, and no expectation hidden behind tradition. There was only honesty. "I once believed a crown was protected by pride," Damien said softly. "You showed me it is protected by compassion. I cannot erase the years you spent alone. I cannot return the birthdays, the stories, or the moments I never shared with our sons. But every tomorrow that remains belongs to my choices, and I choose all of you." Evelyn looked at the familiar ring before lifting her eyes to meet his. She saw no distant king standing before her. She saw a father learning to kneel before love instead of power. The four boys noticed the quiet conversation and wandered over together. Lucas gently tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Will we all stay together now?" he asked with innocent hope. Evelyn smiled through tears that no longer came from sorrow. She knelt beside her sons and wrapped all four of them in a warm embrace before looking back at Damien. "A family is not built in a single promise," she said. "It is built every day through patience, trust, and kindness." Damien nodded without hesitation. "Then I will earn it every day." Instead of placing the moon ring upon her finger himself, he held it out in open hands. After a long quiet moment, Evelyn accepted it and slipped it onto her own finger. It was not a return to the past. It was the beginning of something entirely new. As the bells of Blackwood Kingdom rang across the valley, the people looked toward the palace and saw not only their Alpha King, their Luna, and 4 future heirs, but a family whose greatest strength had never been royal blood. It had always been forgiveness, courage, and the quiet love that refused to disappear even after the darkest night.